My stepmom claimed she donated my late mother's belongings by mistake, but I found them hidden in garbage bags and uncovered her secret pawned jewelry scheme. I, 26F, recently faced a difficult situation involving my stepmother, Karen, 48F, and her daughter, Chloe, 20F. This is a long story with a lot of context, so please bear with me. When I was 15, my mother passed away from cancer after a 2-year battle. Those were the hardest years of my life. I watched my vibrant, loving mom slowly fade away while my father, and I tried to hold our family together. After her death, my father fell into a deep depression. He began drinking heavily and barely managed to keep his job. I had to grow up quickly, taking care of both myself and him. Things began to change when my father met Karen at a work conference when I was 17. She was recently divorced and had a 9-year-old daughter, Chloe. Karen seemed to breathe new life into my father. He stopped drinking, started taking better care of himself, and for the first time since my mom's passing, I saw him genuinely smile. They dated for about 6 months before getting married. It was quick, but I was relieved to see my father healing. Karen and Chloe moved into our family home shortly after the wedding. At first, everything seemed fine. Karen was kind to me, although sometimes a bit too eager to take on a maternal role. I made it clear from the beginning that while I respected her as my father's wife, she wasn't a replacement for my mom. She seemed to understand and took a step back. Chloe, on the other hand, was a sweet and lively child who followed me around like a puppy, which was adorable at first. I moved out for college shortly after they moved in, but I returned home regularly to visit. Over time, the house began to change. Karen brought in new furniture, repainted the walls, and rearranged rooms. I understood her desire to make the space her own, and appreciated that she always consulted my father and me before making major changes. The dynamic shifted during my junior year of college. Karen suggested having a garage sale to declutter the house, and my father agreed. When I came home to help, I noticed that some of my mother's belongings were missing. Small things at first, like her favorite coffee mug and a few books. When I asked Karen about them, she said they must have accidentally been included in the garage sale items. The situation escalated 5 years ago when my father got a promotion that required renovating his home office, which meant clearing out a lot of storage space. Karen took charge of the reorganization, but after the renovation, I noticed many of my mom's things were gone. Her clothes, jewelry, photo albums, and other personal items had disappeared. Karen explained that during the chaos of reorganizing, several boxes had accidentally been sent to donation centers. She acted devastated, claiming she had tried to track them down but couldn't. I was heartbroken. These weren't just possessions. They were my last tangible connections to my mother. Among the missing items were her wedding dress, which I had dreamed of wearing one day, her handwritten family recipe book, a pearl necklace from my grandfather, and cherished photo albums documenting my childhood. Karen apologized repeatedly, and although my father was saddened, he told me we needed to move on. As time went on, I noticed that my mother's presence in the house was slowly being erased. Karen redecorated my mom's garden, painted over the growth chart in the kitchen, and replaced all the family photos with new ones featuring her, my father, and Chloe. I stayed quiet because my father seemed genuinely happy. Last month, everything changed. My father suffered a severe heart attack at work and was rushed to the hospital. As his only child and next of kin, I took emergency leave to handle his affairs. While he was in intensive care, the doctors informed me that he would need surgery and an extended hospital stay. While sorting through paperwork at the house, I needed to find some old insurance documents that my father said were stored in the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, as it was mostly used for storing holiday decorations and old furniture. As I searched through the boxes, I noticed something odd behind a stack of old moving boxes, several large black garbage bags. When I opened the first bag, my heart stopped. Inside were my mother's clothes, still on their hangers, including her wedding dress. Another bag contained photo albums, while a third held her jewelry box, still filled with cherished family heirlooms. Everything that had supposedly been lost during the move was there, stuffed into garbage bags and hidden away like trash. I spent hours going through those bags, crying as I rediscovered pieces of my mother's life that I thought were gone forever. But as the shock wore off, anger quickly took its place. Karen had lied to us. She had deliberately hidden these things and allowed me to grieve their loss for years without saying a word. I drove to the hospital, where Karen was staying with my father, and asked to speak with her privately in the hallway. When I confronted her about the bags, she initially feigned confusion. But when I showed her photos of the bags and their contents, her demeanor shifted entirely. She started crying, claiming she never intended to hurt me. Karen explained that she felt threatened by my mother's lingering presence in the house. She said it was hard for her to live in another woman's space, seeing her belongings everywhere. She also mentioned that Chloe had expressed discomfort about living with a dead woman's stuff. During the renovation, they decided to pack everything away with the intention of dealing with it later. I was furious. These weren't her belongings to hide. She had no right to decide what happened to my mother's possessions. When I reminded her how devastated I had been thinking those items were lost forever, Karen became defensive. She insisted she was just trying to make the house feel like her home and accused me of being unfair for not considering her feelings. That's when I told her she needed to leave my father's house immediately. Karen began crying harder, saying she had nowhere to go on such short notice. Chloe, who had been sitting with my father, overheard the argument and came out to see what was happening. When I told her what I'd discovered, she turned pale. Karen tried to argue that she couldn't leave while my father was in the hospital because he needed her. I reminded her that the house was solely in my father's name and, as his power of attorney, I had the authority to make decisions while he was incapacitated. I gave them 3 days to pack their essential items and find temporary accommodations. Chloe burst into tears, calling me cruel and heartless. She said we'd been family for 10 years and I was throwing them out over old stuff. Later that evening, Karen's sister called, berating me for making them leave on such short notice and accusing me of using my temporary authority to act out old grudges. I stood firm. I helped them pack their clothes and personal items and changed the locks after they left. For now, I've moved back into the house to care for my father when he's discharged from the hospital. I haven't told him what happened yet, as the doctors advised that he avoid stress during his recovery. Some family members think I overreacted and should have waited until my father recovered before making such a drastic decision. They argue that, while Karen's actions were wrong, they don't justify making her and Chloe homeless. But I couldn't bear the thought of them continuing to live in the house after their deception. To me, those bags in the attic proved they never truly saw this as my family home. They saw it as a space to claim for themselves. Update. The situation has become even more complicated since my last post. My father was released from the hospital last week, and I had no choice but to tell him everything. His reaction was nothing like what I expected, and new revelations have made things even messier. When I picked him up from the hospital, I planned to wait until he was settled at home before discussing it. However, Karen had already texted him multiple times about being kicked out, so I had to explain right away. I showed him the garbage bags containing my mother's belongings and explained how I'd found them in the attic. Initially, my father was shocked. He sat silently for a long time, holding my mother's wedding dress. I thought he understood why I'd asked Karen and Chloe to leave, but then he started defending Karen. While he admitted what she did was wrong, he insisted I had no right to kick her out of their home without discussing it as a family. That's when he dropped several bombshells that completely blindsided me. The first revelation came as a shock. My father told me that Karen had been managing their finances for the past few years. Apparently, she used her own money to cover house maintenance, property taxes, and even helped pay off a second mortgage, something I didn't even know existed. He said she had invested a great deal into making the house her home. But the real blow came when he confessed that 2 years ago, he had secretly added Karen to the house deed as a joint owner. He admitted to keeping this from me because he knew I would be upset. This meant I had no legal right to evict her, even with my power of attorney. Yesterday, Karen's lawyer contacted me with documents proving her joint ownership and demanded she be allowed to return immediately. While struggling to process this revelation, I uncovered something even worse. As I was going through the house more thoroughly, searching for anything else that might have been hidden, I found a locked filing cabinet in my father's home office. Using the spare key from his keyring, I opened it and discovered evidence that Karen had been systematically selling my mother's jewelry over the years. Inside were receipts from various pawn shops, dating back 3 years. Some of the pieces listed were unmistakably my mother's, heirlooms that had been in our family for generations. The pearl necklace from my grandfather, my grandmother's emerald earrings, and even my mother's engagement ring had all been sold without anyone's knowledge. When I confronted Karen about this over the phone, she became defensive. She claimed the money was used for necessary house repairs and to start a college fund for Chloe. My father seemed to accept her explanation, but something felt off. I reviewed old bank statements and found large transfers to Karen's personal account that coincided with the dates on the pawnshop receipts. The amounts transferred were slightly less than the values shown on the receipts, suggesting she had kept most of the money for herself. My father is now staying with Karen at her sister's house. He says he won't return home unless I apologize to both Karen and Chloe for what he calls my hasty and cruel actions. He claims the stress of the situation is affecting his recovery, which makes me feel guilty. But I can't bring myself to apologize, knowing what they've done. Karen's sister has been calling me daily, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Several of my father's siblings have also gotten involved, urging me to make amends. They argue that my father needs a stress-free environment to recover and that my stubbornness is jeopardizing his health. Some have even suggested that Karen should press charges against me for illegally evicting her. I consulted a lawyer who confirmed that I had no legal right to evict Karen, as she is now a co-owner of the house. He also said she could sue me for the eviction if she chose to. However, he is helping me build a case regarding the stolen jewelry. We have documentation proving the items were my mother's, and selling them without my father's consent could be considered theft. In response, Karen's lawyer sent a threatening letter, warning that if I pursue legal action over the jewelry, they will countersue for harassment and emotional distress. They claim Karen has evidence of my hostility toward her throughout their marriage and argue that my decision to evict her was the culmination of years of targeted behavior. Last night, my father called, asking me to drop everything and move back to my apartment. He wants Karen and Chloe to return to the house so things can go back to normal. When I brought up the jewelry, he became angry, dismissing my concerns as materialistic. He said, "They're just things," failing to grasp that this isn't about monetary value. It's about the betrayal of trust and the loss of family history. I remain firm in my decision not to apologize, but I am deeply concerned about my father's health. His doctor called to inform me that his blood pressure is elevated, and the doctor attributes it to the stress of the situation. Part of me wonders if I should relent for his sake, but another part feels like doing so would betray my mother's memory all over again. Update. The situation took an unexpected turn last week when Chloe contacted me privately, completely changing everything I thought I knew about Karen. I'm still trying to process everything, but I'll do my best to explain what happened. It all started with a message from Chloe asking if we could meet in private. She seemed anxious and was adamant that Karen not find out. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop far from both of our usual areas. When Chloe arrived, she looked visibly exhausted, like she hadn't been sleeping. She broke down almost immediately, saying she couldn't stay silent anymore. According to her, Karen had been planning something behind everyone's back for months. Karen had been secretly meeting with real estate agents, trying to persuade my father to sell the house and move to a smaller property, but the real shocker was Karen's true motivation for the move. Chloe showed me screenshots of text messages between Karen and several debt collectors, revealing a hidden gambling addiction Karen had been struggling with for years. She had been frequenting local casinos, racking up massive debts, and the collectors were becoming increasingly aggressive. The truth about my mother's jewelry also came out. Chloe admitted that Karen hadn't used the money for house repairs or a college fund as she had claimed. Every penny had gone toward paying off Karen's gambling debts. Whenever creditors threatened legal action, another piece of my mother's jewelry would mysteriously vanish. Chloe was crying as she showed me the evidence. Bank statements with regular large withdrawals from local casinos, hidden credit card statements revealing massive cash advances, and even photos Karen had taken of my mother's jewelry to send to potential buyers. The most heartbreaking part was Chloe's reason for coming forward. She had recently discovered that the college fund Karen claimed to have set up for her didn't exist. Every dollar that was supposed to go toward her education had been gambled away. Chloe only found out when she tried to register for her next semester and realized no payments had been made. I took all of this information to my father. At first, he didn't even want to look at it, insisting I was trying to turn him against Karen. But when I showed him the evidence Chloe provided, especially the bank statements showing withdrawals matching the dates of the jewelry sales, he finally began to understand. My father spent hours reviewing everything. When he called the bank, he learned that Karen had opened several credit cards in their joint names without his knowledge and maxed them out, taking cash advances for gambling. The total debt was staggering. When confronted, Karen didn't deny any of it. Instead, she turned on Chloe, calling her ungrateful and a traitor. She even threatened to cut Chloe off entirely, vowing to make sure she never finished college. Seeing how quickly Karen turned on her own daughter was chilling. My father has since moved back home and started divorce proceedings. Karen is fighting it fiercely, claiming she's entitled to half of everything, including the house. Her lawyer argues that since she's on the deed and contributed to household expenses, she has an equal claim to all assets. Chloe has moved in with us temporarily. She's been struggling with guilt, both for her role in hiding my mother's belongings and for not coming forward sooner about Karen's gambling. She explained that when she was 9, Karen told her they needed to hide my mother's things because they were making my father sad. At the time, Chloe believed Karen was trying to help. By the time she realized the truth, she felt it was too late to speak up. The hardest part for Chloe has been coming to terms with her mother's true nature. She's realized that Karen's loving persona was mostly an act. Karen had always presented herself as the perfect wife and mother to the outside world, but behind closed doors, she was manipulative and deceitful. Chloe shared stories of how Karen would guilt-trip her into keeping secrets, using emotional manipulation to maintain control. Update 3. The final chapter of this saga has concluded, and I wanted to share how everything turned out. These past months have been an emotional whirlwind, but things are finally beginning to stabilize. The divorce proceedings are well underway, and my father's lawyer has built a compelling case highlighting Karen's financial misconduct. It turns out Karen's financial deceptions ran even deeper than we initially realized. Investigators uncovered several unauthorized credit cards and personal loans she had taken out, often using the house as collateral, without my father's knowledge. The total debt was almost double what we had first estimated. 2 weeks ago, Karen made one last desperate attempt to reconcile with my father. She showed up at our house unexpectedly late at night, crying and begging for forgiveness. She claimed she was getting help for her gambling addiction and had joined a support group. However, when my father didn't immediately respond to her, please, her demeanor shifted drastically. She began threatening to reveal personal details about my father's struggles with alcohol after my mother's death, insinuating it could ruin his career. I recorded the entire interaction on my phone and passed it on to our lawyer. Her attempted blackmail only strengthened our case. Chloe has completely cut ties with her mother after discovering even more betrayals. Not only had Karen drained the supposed college fund, but she had also taken out student loans in Chloe's name without her knowledge. Chloe only found out when she began receiving collection notices for loans she never applied for. We're now working with authorities to prove these loans were fraudulently obtained. We've also made some progress recovering my mother's jewelry. Several pieces, including my grandmother's emerald earrings, were located at local pawn shops. The shops were cooperative once our lawyer got involved and provided documentation of their transactions with Karen. Sadly, many pieces had already been sold to private buyers and are likely gone forever. The recovered items are now securely stored in a safe deposit box at my bank. My father and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. He has apologized for not recognizing Karen's true nature earlier and for doubting me when I first uncovered my mother's belongings. He admitted that after my mother's death, his fear of being alone blinded him to the red flags about Karen from the very beginning. Karen's sister and a few others still try to reach out, claiming Karen is the real victim. They argue her gambling was a result of living in a house haunted by my mother's memory, and even blame my mother's illness and passing for traumatizing Karen. We've blocked them all on every platform. Chloe is staying with us as she works, through the aftermath of her mother's actions. She's working part-time and taking online classes while we deal with the fraudulent loans. Despite everything Karen has done, Chloe sometimes feels guilty about exposing her mother's secrets. We're supporting her and helping her see that she made the right choice by coming forward. The house feels different now. We've brought my mother's belongings down from the attic, and her photos are back on the walls. My father and I often spend evenings together, cooking from her old recipe book and reminiscing. It's bittersweet, but it feels like we're finally starting to heal. Some relatives still believe I was too harsh when I first discovered my mother's belongings hidden away. They say I should have been more understanding of Karen's feelings about living in another woman's house, but I don't regret exposing the truth. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop sacrificing your well-being for the comfort of others. Karen's final court hearing is next month. Her lawyer is still pushing for her to receive half of everything in the divorce, but the evidence of her financial fraud and deception should work against her. Either way, we're ready to close this painful chapter of our lives and move forward without her.